Now, folks, it's the 111th anniversary since the Titanic ship sank, and it also happens to be 25 years since the incomparable film starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, which makes me feel ancient. Now, I'm joined by journalist and Titanic historian Nelson Aspen right now. Nelson, thank you very much for your time. This is quite a big day for Titanic superfans, isn't it? The Titaniacs.
That's right. I am a proud Titaniac, is the moniker we have coined for ourselves. And April 15th is a day that's very important on our calendar. As you said, it's the 111th anniversary of the sinking. And it can be very somber, but it's also a day of remembrance because she is the ship of dreams. There are so many stories, human elements to her tragedy. I mean, whether it's the romance, the mystery of why it happened, the class distinction of who survived and who didn't, the hubris of an unsinkable ship that could absolutely sink. We all know the story, but yet it always seems to compel us. And I'm excited you're showing a little bit of the trailer from Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries. I'm part of this documentary that releases today, if you go to shipofdreamsfilm.com. And this documentary by filmmaker Alexandra Boyd reunites some of the actors from James Cameron's film. Alexandra had a small part in the film all those years ago, and she had the very clever idea of getting these supporting actors to write their diaries about the experience. And now, a quarter century later, just in time for James Cameron to re-release his film, she has created this documentary. So it's really fascinating to see these beloved characters that we've come to know so well over the last several years. They share recollections, behind-the-scenes stories, and it gets quite emotional, Darren.
That's the documentary there that people, of course, are free to Google and find. Now, what do you why do you reckon, if I can ask you to get into the minds of the public, why did we find the Titanic in particular so fascinating? Do you think we would be so intrigued if it wasn't for Mr. DiCaprio and, of course, Kate Winslet?
Well, we certainly wouldn't be as intrigued if the ship had just had smooth sailing and arrived in New York as planned. It's because it was a disaster of epic proportions that it is so timeless to us, like a 9/11 or Vesuvius blowing. I mean, these are epic tragedies where people from all walks of life are thrown together. This is the recipe for any successful disaster movie you see. And so you mentioned Titanic, but it really didn't have anything to do with the love story of Kate and Leo, which, you know, was fictional and certainly very romantic, if you think of it that way. But it was the fact that third class, second class, first class, men, women, people from all over the world, every demographic was represented on the same ship. And that's when the great equalizer comes into play, Darren.
Well, Nelson, best of luck with the documentary. I'm sure it's going to be fascinating, and I'll watch it, seek it out myself. I promise you that, Nelson.
Very good.
But thank you very much for your time today and for joining us to actually commemorate this anniversary. I'm going to go to my esteemed panel now. The political commentator Reem Ibrahim and the broadcaster and lawyer Andrew Eborn still join me now. Reem, are you a Titanic fan? I mean, I regret to say that you make me feel ancient because you are how old? Remind my viewers.
I am 20.
20. So you weren't even around. You were a
not even
star
born.
in the sky.
I was not even born when Titanic came out, but it is still one of my all-time favourite movies.
Good.
I absolutely love it, and I think that what I particularly like about the movie is the class dynamic between Rose and Jack and how they sort of came together, and Jack sort of entering this world of the upper classes. I think it's fantastic and a beautiful love story.
Andrew, you have historic connections.
I do. I'm 25. I've just had a tough paper round. But no, absolutely. So my grandfather, the wonderful William Wheeler, he actually supplied silk blinds to the Titanic. So a great chance to remember him as well. And it's extraordinary because they tried to, bizarrely, resurrect the Titanic a couple of times. People are trying to build the new one. They must learn from history, I would have thought. But that's what they tried to do. But William Wheeler, remembering him, he did supply blinds to the Titanic.
Wow. That's impressive.
It's fantastic.
I mean, Reem, when it comes to these sort of issues and these documentaries being created to commemorate these events, do you think harking back to the past is useful? Because, I mean, it's a whole question in and of itself. We live in an age in which actually history and the politics of that history are indeed controversial.
They are controversial. I mean, as a history university student, I've got to say I totally think that this stuff is fantastic, and I think that actually looking back on our past is the only way we can look towards the future and learn from the past. I mean, a lot of these political issues that we have at the moment when it comes to freedom of expression or with educational reforms, a lot of these things are things that people fought for 100 years ago as well. I mean, 1912 was a commemorative year. I mean, we were just about to enter a world war, and there's a huge amount of politics that happened over there during that time. I think we have a lot to learn from the people of the Titanic.
Andrew, remembering history important?
Oh, absolutely. As a futurist, what I also do is we predict the future, have a 100% record. And the reason for that is I always say people turn around and say history repeats itself. And the reason history repeats itself is because you don't learn the lessons from history. So look back at virtually most major events and learn those lessons.
So have you got any time for the activists then that say, actually, you know, we should just denigrate history?
I think that we should always shine a spotlight on it. We should question everything, because we're drowning in a sea of information, misinformation, most of which is false, which is where we started on the show.
All right, yes, we did indeed. Well, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure joining the two of you, Reem Ibrahim and Andrew Eborn. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Now, folks, indeed, again, my thanks to my absolutely brilliant panel, which I'm sure you agree, as indeed all of my guests.